Thank you very much. And thank you all for being with me for a data session right before your lunch break. I know that data is not always the most interesting topic to talk about, but hopefully we can share some exciting information with you today. I do apologize. I did take a glance through the participant list and I saw a few common names from the session I just concluded. So you may feel a sense of deja vu as we go through this. Hopefully I will present the same information, but it may be presented in a slightly different manner. I take no offense if you feel that you've already heard it and do choose to leave. Hopefully, maybe you've had some time to think of other questions, whether from this session or the previous one. So with that, my name is Kim DeLellis, and I work for the Center for Workforce Information and Analysis. We are a bureau within the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. This slide provides a little bit of information about who we are. We perform a wide variety of services and roles in conjunction with the production and release of workforce and economic statistics. We support several other partners within our bureau, or within our department rather, primarily the unemployment compensation section, workers' compensation, and new hire program activity. Our primary focus, however, and what we are commonly referred to as, is the labor market information shop for the state of Pennsylvania. We produce, disseminate, and analyze workforce and economic statistics. We are in a lot of partnerships with federal agencies that actually fund us to do this work. The luxury of this means that we are able to provide anything that we prepare back to you free of charge. There are very few instances where we actually have to charge for our services. So when in doubt, if you have a question related to the workforce or to the economy, CWIA is a great place to start. We do have a website. They're listed at the bottom of the page. We'll go into a little bit of detail on that in just a minute. It's a great place to see what we have readily available out there for you. We have a series of canned data products, tools, publications. We also have access to an entire database of all of our information. So if you're looking for differences over time, if you're looking to compare different data sets that we aren't presenting in a formal publication, they may exist in our data warehouse. In addition to our website, which makes data readily available to you, and in addition to my contact information, which will be provided at the end of this presentation, we do have a customer service section here within the Center for Workforce Information and Analysis. They are available by telephone or by email. Unlike most Commonwealth resource accounts, we are manned by actual human beings, so they are very responsive in getting back to you within a day or two, whether you call in or email in any requests. So my advice to you is, if you're looking for information about the workforce or the economy, or something that you think might be related to that, CWI is a great place to start, and our rates are very reasonable. So with that, I just wanted to showcase within our website, and again, the website is shown there in the bottom corner. We have a banner at the top of our website currently highlighting our 26th edition of the Pennsylvania Career Guide. That was discussed in my previous session. It will not be discussed here, but if you are interested in obtaining hard copies, feel free to contact me or our customer service group, and we'll be able to make that connection for you. Underneath of that, with the red circle, you will see something labeled as products A to Z. This is the easiest way to get into the most comprehensive list of products readily available to you, the public. It's a great place to start if you have a question. We try our best to make it user-friendly, but we understand that you still may struggle to find what you are looking for. That is where the human factor of our organization comes to be. So if we click on products A to Z, and this is normally how we would send most of our customers in if they're looking for something, not surprisingly, you will find an alphabetical listing of our products listed from A to Z. You'll quickly note that we are numbers people. We are not the most creative when it comes to marketing or labeling of things. So we tend to go with the most straightforward. There are rare occasions where you do see some creativity and marketing influences in there, they are purely by accident. We are definitely numbers people, and that's what we're here to help you with. Today we will cover just 5 of the items that are listed in this alphabetical listing. You'll see that they have arrows next to them. We're going to talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list, the high priority occupation list, and then connecting that back to the source data that actually allows us to produce those. In addition to that source information, we have started to put our information into data dashboards. Our customers seem to like the visual representation rather than the spreadsheet representation that we as numbers people are more comfortable with. So we are doing our best to provide you multiple options for viewing our information. A few things to keep in mind as we discuss CWIA's data sets here today. CWIA produces a wealth of information. The bulk of it is either produced by industry or by occupation. While this appears to be a very simple distinction, many individuals confuse these two terms, individuals within our own agency. So in order to be sure that we are on the same page in today's presentation, when we talk about industry data, that's going to refer to the employer or the organization where the individual works. So an individual can work in a construction company, they could work in a hospital, they could work for a trucking firm, that would be their industry. An occupation is the actual work that the individual is performing. Every industry has a wide range of occupations found in it. So a hospital, which would be an industry, has occupations such as registered nurses, IT workers, doctors, medical assistants, janitorial staff, etc. The primary focus of our discussion will center around occupational information because in reality, that's what training prepares an individual to do. Once you have a set of skills, you are able to perform the job duties associated with a specific occupation. Occupational data is classified under a federal structure known as the Standard Occupational Classification, or SOC structure. It does follow a hierarchy that goes from a major grouping such as office and administrative support workers down to some very detailed occupational classifications such as a bookkeeper. So you'll notice that the codes listed there start with the same 2 codes, which means they share similar skills. As we add actual numbers instead of zeros, that clarification becomes refined, the occupation becomes more specific. While the SOC structure is similar to the coding structure used in ONET, it is not exactly the same. ONET is a very popular product. A lot of people have used it to identify skills related with an occupation, what green jobs are, what STEM jobs are. ONET is a very popular tool, especially amongst the educational community and definitely here within the center. While it does base on the SOC structure, ONET being a federal database that has a little bit of luxury in not collecting specific data, does dig down into an even finer detail for some of these occupations. So for the example above of bookkeeping, accounting, and auditing clerks that our data would show, ONET might actually have details specific to bookkeepers as one code, accounting clerks as a separate code, and auditing clerks as a third code. Another thing to keep in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about the data specifically and products created from our projections and wage data. These data are what we call cross-industry. In other words, a cashier is a cashier is a cashier. It does not matter where that individual is employed. We are classifying them based on the skills they are performing. They are assigned to a specific occupational code, and we do not take into account whether that person happens to be working in healthcare or working in retail. And then lastly, every occupation is assigned a minimum educational attainment level. This is determined at the federal level based on surveys of individuals working in these occupations and what employers are looking for when hiring these occupations. It is not to say that there aren't pockets of the country or even certain pockets within certain industries where the minimum levels might be different, but the majority of individuals looking for work in that particular occupation would be expected to have the minimum educational attainment listed for that occupation. And that becomes important as you're dealing with individuals who are trying to figure out what career path might be the best fit for them and how much additional schooling they are willing to undertake. So with that, there's a very strong connection that must be made whenever we're matching data from the educational side of the house to our workforce data on our side of the house. And I have been personally working with our partners at the Department of Education for way too many years to make sure that we are all speaking the same language. Through those collaborations, we have identified that while a matrix exists to connect the classification of instructional program, or SIP codes, that many of you are probably familiar with, used to classify curriculums and programs of study that are used in the educational sector, along that match to our standard occupational classification codes used to group occupations and therefore get to our employment projections and wage data. That national crosswalk has been developed. Somebody else went to a painstaking effort to take the first stab at looking at the skills that are acquired through a training program and the skills expected of a particular occupation or job, and to create a crosswalk that says for this CIP code or training program, these are the likely SOC code or occupational outcomes. What we have learned over the years, however, is that it's not always caught correctly at the national level. And this is where Pennsylvania, for the past 15 or so years at this point, has been working very diligently with the Department of Education to prepare and to sustain a dynamic version of that SIP to SOC crosswalk, which allows us to integrate Pennsylvania specific connections that may not be seen at the national level. It allows us to be receptive and adaptive to emerging technologies and emerging occupations. While we don't necessarily change the national crosswalk, we have learned that a lot of things are missed. That happens naturally because both coding structures change as programs change, as occupations change. It's frustrating for all of us, but at any given time, there is a new SIP code or a new SOC code structure being introduced. Data is not always as dynamic, nor is the educational sector. Sometimes it takes a while to modify a training program to reflect a new SIP code. So for that reason, Pennsylvania's dynamic version often includes multiple sets of both SIPs and SOCs to try to be as comprehensive as possible. Another big thing we learned over the years was that career and technical education doesn't have the luxury of using every single SIP code in the SIP code structure. In reality, the last time we looked at this, career and technical ed is using about 110 of the more than 1,600 SIP codes available. So about 10%, actually less than 10% of the codes are viable options for those of you in career and technical education. This becomes very problematic as you're trying to do these matches and make sure you're capturing all of the relevant occupations. The other thing that we've uncovered through our discussions over the years, not only with the Department of Education, but specifically with career and technical centers around the Commonwealth, is that due to the nature of the programs being offered at your facilities, the SIP codes ending in 4 zeros or 4 nines, which tend to be the kind of catch-all SIP codes, are often applied to your program, but at the national level, do not get crosswalk to all relevant programs. And in fact, those ending in 4 nines are often only associated with a corresponding residual SOC code, or what we call an all other. So you might have a health technician program that aligns to things like a medical assistant or an information technician. But at the national level, that crosswalk is going to take your program that ends with 4 nines and say it only aligns to the all other health information technician occupation. And that's not going to be very helpful for you as you're trying to figure out which occupations are a best fit for your program and what is the demand for individuals exiting your program. So through that, over 15 years of back and forth and conversations at both the Commonwealth level and specific career and technical education center level, we have developed our Pennsylvania specific SIP to SOC crosswalk. And that is readily available at the link shown at the bottom of this page. I've included an example just so that you can see. A great example, about 2/3 of the way, down this page, you'll see occupation, or I'm sorry, a SIP code that ends with a 99. That may be a SIP code that is relevant at the national level, but not one that is afforded or open to those of you operating career and technical programs. You may be told that you have to use the 010000 at the top, or the 01.9999, which is not shown here. So our efforts over the years have been to make sure that the 110 SIP codes that are specific and relevant to career and technical ed are as complete as we can possibly make them. And this makes it easier for those of you with those programs to then collect and analyze data on the occupations that you are preparing students to enter. This list, while not updated very often at the national level, is reevaluated every year by the Department of Labor and Industry. It's done in conjunction with the release of the high priority occupation and Pennsylvania in-demand occupation lists. The reason for that is there is a strong connection between the SIP-SOC crosswalk and both of those lists. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail about each of those lists, but first I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page, that we've gone to great efforts to make sure that your programs and the skills that you are providing to students are being accurately captured here. So if you're looking at the SIP-SOC crosswalk and you have a career and tech program and you don't feel that an occupation that is being prepared for is listed in this SIP-SOC crosswalk, I strongly encourage you to reach out to either us or your counterparts at the Department of Education. We work with them regularly to make sure that we are keeping this current and reflective of what is being presented in each of these career and technical programs as they evolve and change over time. So with that, there are two primary lists that people like to refer to as in-demand lists. And the reason I'm going to cover both of these for you today is that one is truly an in-demand list. The other is an in-demand list of sorts, but with a very targeted focus. So I'm going to go through each of our lists, the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list and the high priority occupation list, and then present you with a side-by-side comparison table so that you can understand the difference between the two of them. The Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list is relatively new. It's something we started back in 2017. The reason for that alludes back to what I was just mentioning. Individuals were calling our high priority occupation list an in-demand list, and the high priority occupation list is actually so much more than an in-demand list. The PA EIDL's goal was to be more inclusive. It is a career exploration tool. There are more than 800 different occupations that can be options for job seekers. This tool allows you to shortlist that list of 800 occupations to a much more manageable, about 250 or so, that are truly in-demand careers within the Commonwealth. It shows viable career choices for individuals who are looking to enter the job market today, Those who are entertaining things like a certification program, an apprenticeship, an associate's degree, or jobs that they might have to take 1 to 2 years to be ready for. So they would be looking to enter those tomorrow. And those individuals who are looking at the 4-year or more path and actually looking at jobs down the line in the future. Occupations can only be included on the Pennsylvania EIDL if they meet the established demand criteria and outlook. So we're making sure that these jobs have significant annual demand and or they are growing at an above average rate, which suggests the need for additional workers to enter these jobs. There is currently no process to add anything else to the PA EIDL. It is strictly data driven. How it connects to career and technical ed? Well, as I mentioned, we started this list back in 2017. At that point, through discussions with our partners over at Career and Technical Education under the Pennsylvania Department of Education, they were going to transition away from using the HPO list and to start using the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list. The reason for that is many career and technical education programs aligned to occupations on the PA EIDL that may not appear on the local HPO list. So this was a benefit to the career and technical ed centers across the Commonwealth. It was a more appropriate list for what Pennsylvania's Department of Ed was using this connection for. And that was things like your equipment grant approvals, industry recognized credentials, program evaluations, things like that. The HPO list is still relevant to any career and technical centers that partner with our PA CareerLink offices. And that's usually in the form of getting adults into your training programs via the Eligible Training Provider List, or ETPL. So the HPO list is not something you can forget about totally, but it is something that has been downplayed over the years. With that, as I'm showing an example on the next page, I will point out that in my previous session discussing this, it was brought to my attention that there may still be a connection within the Perkins grant. I am going to look into that with our partners and just get clarification, but it was our understanding that the only connection to HPOs for the Department of Education going forward would be those working with the PA CareerLink partners. So with that, for those of you who have not seen our Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list, again, we are numbers people. We don't make things pretty very often, but it's a spreadsheet basically that lists about 250 occupations that are in demand, that are fast growing, that offer good career options for individuals within the Commonwealth. While it is not a factor in determining whether or not something makes this list, we also provide the occupational wage information associated with that occupation. So this is a one-stop location to look at about a third of the occupations in Pennsylvania, those with the greatest demand, and see what opportunities exist for those willing to enter the workforce today, those who are going to get a little bit more schooling and enter the workforce tomorrow, or those who are pursuing a 4-year degree and looking at entering the workforce in the future. Okay, I seem to be stuck. There we go. On the flip side of that, the high priority occupation list. The high priority occupation list was developed with the distinct purpose of targeting local workforce investment monies to occupations in demand in that area. It was created strictly for the Pennsylvania CareerLink offices to take workforce monies that are provided to them and best target them to occupations in demand by employers, paying a family sustaining wage, and having higher or evolving skill sets. When this list was developed back in 2005, it quickly became kind of its own beast in that it is an in-demand occupation list of sorts, but it is not by definition a true in-demand occupation list. And our other state agencies started to jump on board with this and use it for evaluation purposes without fully understanding how it was developed. This created issues on both sides in that we started to get requests to have things added to the HPO list for intentions that were not the heart of the high priority occupation process. So when we develop the HPO list, occupations are included if they meet demand criteria, wage criteria, and that there's not already an oversupply of workers looking for those jobs. So we want to make sure that these are the opportunities that are best options in that local area. However, we do factor in that additional criteria that they must provide a family sustaining wage. What this does is often knock out occupations that are considered entry points into a career. We quickly learned that this was not necessarily the best way to go. So as we developed the HPO list, we not only had the data-driven side of the house, we also incorporated an opportunity for our local workforce partners, whether that be the board or in consultation with the educators, employers, et cetera, in their area, to petition to have additional occupations added based on activities occurring in their region. This is an annual process. There are 3 different types of justification options the local board can go through. They can have things added for several reasons. One is we know our data doesn't always capture everything going on locally, especially currently. So we know things change over time. They have the option of petitioning for that. They have the option of petitioning based on regional initiatives in their area. So if they're pulling together partners and they have a healthcare consortium or they have a construction consortium, they have regular interactions with employers, training providers, et cetera, in their area, and they know there is an unmet demand for certain types of workers, they can petition to us to have those occupations added as HPOs. And then finally, there's an option for those entry-level careers I alluded to earlier. We understand that oftentimes those entry-level careers provide the foundational skills necessary to advance into high priority occupations. So there is a petition option for them to get some of those entry-level careers on their HPO list if they can document that as the stepping stone into something that is already an HPO. If a local area does petition for an occupation to be added, it stays on the list for 3 years. And that was done because we know that it takes a while on both sides of the house for things to change. We wanted to make sure that we weren't putting an undue burden in terms of effort and work on the local areas each year. So a successful petition remains on the list for 3 years, despite what the data-driven side of the list is doing from year to year. So how are HPOs still connected to the eligible training provider list and ultimately to career and technical education? In order for an individual who is going through the Pennsylvania Career Link to receive subsidized funding for their interest, first, the training program must meet certain eligibility criteria to be added to the statewide eligible training provider list. Applications are submitted to your local area. It doesn't necessarily have to be the local area where you are physically located. We encourage our local areas to partner with each other. So for instance, if a school in Lancaster needs to have something added, but the HPO exists in the Harrisburg area, we encourage those agencies and workforce boards to partner together. Once a training program is added to the eligible training provider list, the training program is then eligible for individuals in any workforce development area to become funded through the Pennsylvania Career Link staff. So they can refer individuals to your career and technical education program, even as outside of their general area. So here's an example of the high priority occupation list for South Central. Very straightforward. We don't put a lot of fluff on this either, because what's important is ultimately built into the systems that analyze the connection. But you'll be able to go through there and you'll see that each local area has a very distinct list We do encourage our workforce development areas to partner with neighboring workforce development areas. The regional approach holds a lot of weight when we're looking at petitions, but each list is unique and has a unique list of occupations. Same information that we provide for the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list shows up on the high priority occupation list. And there is one of those for each of the 22 workforce development areas. So a quick comparison between the PA idle and the high priority occupation list, something that you can go back and look at outside of here. I pretty much covered all of this. There are some similarities. There are several very important distinctions. Ultimately, what it comes down to in terms of career and technical education, your primary focus would be the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list, but it is not to say that you can forget about the high priority occupation list. This is definitely a topic that we have worked very closely with our partners at the Department of Education to make sure that we are covering all concerned parties and addressing all issues. So as you're looking at this and as you think of how it relates to your daily work, I encourage you, if you feel there's a mismatch on that SIP to SOC crosswalk, please let us know, or let your representative over at the Pennsylvania Department of Education know. If you have any questions in the distinction between these two lists, feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions. Don't hesitate. We know there's still a lot of confusion because HPOs once were such big players in career and tech ed and have since slowly been replaced by the PA idle. So with that, I just wanted to take a few minutes. Both of the products that we talked about, the PA idle and the HPO list, concentrate on using two of our primary occupational data sets, our occupational employment projections and our occupational wages. If you want to dig down into a little bit more detail, either coming from the PA idle or the HPO list, or frankly, you want to see information on occupations that don't appear on either of those lists, you would come to these two resources that provide information on all 800 plus occupational codes. Our occupational employment projections are released every 2 years. They provide a 10-year outlook. The information is available by industry and more importantly by occupation. It provides a look of how many people are currently employed in the occupation, how many are projected to be employed in that occupation 10 years out, what that equates to in terms of a percentage change. Is the occupation going to experience growth or decline due to industry expansion? But more importantly, it provides a complete metric of the total demand for that occupation. And as you'll see in those last 4 columns, total demand, the far right column, is actually the sum of the 3 preceding columns. So there's demand due to growth, demand due to exits, and demand due to transfers. People aren't just coming and going from occupations based on what industry is doing. The workforce is fluid. People exit the workforce on a daily basis. They may move out of state. They may move to a different location. They may have unfortunate events that require them to leave the workforce altogether. That creates a demand due to exit. There are also individuals who transfer to other occupations. They may get promoted, they may complete their schooling and transfer from a part-time job to a full-time job related to their educational background. If they are staying within their current local workforce, but changing the career that they are performing, that is considered demand due to transfer. As you'll see, if you're looking at those columns, the contribution of demand due to growth is significantly smaller than the contribution due to exiting or transferring. And that's why it's important when you're talking about occupations to make sure you look at that full demand picture. These estimates do reflect the actual jobs, not people. So if you have somebody who is working part-time in 2 different occupations, yes, they are counted twice in each of those occupations. That is why some of the numbers are a little bit higher, especially in fields where part-time work is prevalent. It may take 2 or 3 individuals working part-time to be the equivalent of 1 full-time person. So these are measures of jobs, not actual people. Because we provide this information and prepare this information in conjunction with federal partners, as I alluded to earlier, this information is produced uniformly across the nation, which means if you happen to be in an area that is close to a neighboring state, there is similar information available for things like New Jersey, Maryland, New York, Ohio, etc. You will find statewide data for all of those states, including our own. But in addition to our statewide data here in Pennsylvania, we also produce projections by metropolitan statistical areas, which cover about a third or so of the counties in Pennsylvania and are centralized around the most urbanized areas, high population densities, and then workforce development areas, which do cover all 67 counties. This way we make sure that you have some localized data available to you, that you don't have to look at everything at a statewide level, because given the geographic composition of Pennsylvania, we have very different areas and very different needs in something like Philadelphia compared to Northern Tier, where there are sometimes more animals than people. In addition to that occupational demand, we have information on occupational wages. Most of the time when we talk about occupational wages, we tend to focus on the average wage, which is a very good indicator of what an individual can expect to make in an occupation, but it is not an indicator of what somebody coming into that field can expect to make. So it's important to have more information at your fingertips than just that annual average wage or average hourly wage. We also include information on the entry level wage, the experience level wage, as well as a mid-range, which is the middle 50% of people working in an occupation. Between those final columns, it gives an individual a really good perspective of how their wages may change through the life of their career. As you're comparing two different occupations, you might find that one has a lower wage to start than another occupation, but the potential for wage growth, as demonstrated either through the mid-range or what that experience level wage ends up being, exists for some occupations. So while you may come in at a lower wage, you have the potential to achieve a higher wage as you gain experience and years in that career. Other occupations, you may come in at a higher wage, but your wage cap is much lower. Again, very valuable information as you're helping people explore different careers, compare different careers. We do release this information annually, unlike our projections. This data does come out every year, usually sometime around April. Again, it's created in conjunction with our federal partners, so it allows for comparisons across state. We produce information for the same regions that we produced for our projections. So the state, those metropolitan statistical areas, and workforce development areas, but we also produce wages by county for Pennsylvania. And you'll see that those final two are unique here within the Commonwealth. I do encourage you, though, to keep in mind that our primary goal is to protect the identity of the employers that we get this information from. So as you drill down to smaller and smaller geographies, the likelihood that data will become confidential or non-releasable does increase. So just keep that in mind. As you look at county level data, you may not always be able to find the information for your specific occupation. You may have to go up to a slightly larger geography in scope. With that, I wanted to end with one final thought, which is obviously our wage data and our employment projections data is a very comprehensive product. It is something that we are funded to do, and it is something based on trends, both in the occupational realm as well as what's happening in Pennsylvania's population. We were not expecting a little thing like a pandemic to totally disrupt the economic situation here in Pennsylvania for the past 18 months or so. While many industry sectors and occupations have regulated and returned to some sense of normalcy as it was prior to the pandemic and the recession, not all industries have been that lucky. So the trends that we may have been projecting aren't necessarily what is being seen right now. That being said, the projections are modeled in such a way to account for normal economic activity, including recessions. However, this pandemic recession was not by any means anything normal. So you might want to, as you're looking at the demand for certain occupations, also take into consideration what is actually being posted right now. And that's where our online job postings dashboard comes into play. It is a very useful tool that for each workforce development area provides monthly updates on the online job posting ads that are out there. We partner with a source that gathers all of those online postings. They disaggregate them, so they make sure that nothing is being counted multiple times. And they classify them by industry, by occupation. They pull out key features such as whether or not the job is full-time or part-time, what certifications might be required, and produce a series of informational tabs that we have provided to you in a dashboard. The dashboard essentially looks like an upside down Excel spreadsheet, and that there are a series of tabs across the top that follow these categories. And then you can actually see the data as you click through the different tabs. The one I like to point people to is actually the last one on the list. So it sometimes gets overlooked because you have to scroll to get to it, but that's the top industries and or occupations. This gives you an idea of which occupations in the last month, or in the previous month rather, had the most postings in your area. So if we were to look at that in the dashboard, this is what you would see. And if you just open up the dashboard and you click on that tab, you're going to get information for all 22 workforce development areas. Berks pops to the top of the list because that's how the alphabet works. So we do have the ability for you to get all of the 22 workforce development areas. However, most people really are just interested in what's happening in their own backyard. Under the workforce development drop-down option there in the upper left, you can click on that, deselect all of the workforce development areas, and then select the one that is most relevant to you. It'll create a list just like this for what's going on in your immediate area. This is always a good option to make sure that as you're exploring careers, especially if someone is exploring a career that they wish to enter today, they've either chosen a field that does not require continuing education, or they have completed enough training to enter the field. This gives them an idea of what the employment outlook looks like right now. It gives them the current number of postings or the most recent number of postings, what those same postings look like a year ago for that occupation, and how it has changed over time. So you can quickly see that something is clearly different in the need for registered nurses from a year ago, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we need fewer registered nurses. It just means that the online posting activity has changed. It's not surprising when you look at this list to see something like truck drivers with a much higher need than 1 year ago. Industries are struggling to get workers who can move goods from point A to point B. So the need for truck drivers has increased. Therefore, the number of postings has increased. I will caution you, however, as you're looking at this data, just keep one thing in mind, in that an online job posting does not always equate to an actual opening with the employer. Our analysis of this information has shown, especially with employers of entry-level occupations, they are constantly in need for workers, or at least looking for them, even if they do not have a current vacancy available. But again, if you partner the real-time job postings outlook with our occupational projections, employment annual demands, it really does help provide an idea of the demand exists now. Is that expected to continue? Or if you're looking for a job that you can enter right now, what is the realistic options in terms of job postings? And then you can dig down into looking at specific employers that have postings, what those jobs look like by industry, specific cities within your area, etc. So that's what I wanted to cover for you today. I know it's a lot, and I know I went through it pretty quickly. I'm certainly open to any questions, and I do see a few that have popped up in there. Lori, I don't know if you're able to actually provide some of those or pass some of those along for me.
So I'll do this if you
Oh,
want.
okay, thank you.
So we have one from John Seaman. It says, can you reiterate why it is important to look at all three factors that contribute to total demand, growth, exit, and transfers?
Sure. So when you're talking about the need for an employer to have certain occupations, there are the three components: growth, exits, and transfers, that contribute to that overall demand across employers. Growth is a very small component of that. And there are industries that are growing and there are industries that are contracting. So when you look at the overall demand for an occupation, it turns out that about 10% or less of the total demand actually comes from what's happening within the industry in terms of expansion or contraction. Most of the activity, and while it's similar to, but not exactly the same as turnover, occurs from people coming and going from occupations. So they can come and go entirely from the workforce, which is an exit, or they can come and go from an occupation going to another occupation in the same workforce. That's considered a transfer. Why it's important is no matter why the person is coming or going or that growth need exists, the employer ultimately needs a new body to fill that position. So you need to add all three pieces together to get that complete idea of the demand for a given worker. To illustrate this, manufacturing is an industry that has been declining or stagnant for many, many years now. So if you were to only look at growth, you might think that we need fewer production workers because manufacturing is contracting. In reality, the annual demand for production workers, which are primarily found in manufacturing, still exceeds the annual demand for computer occupation workers. So while IT is a large field, it is a growing field. There are still more individuals and more openings within the Commonwealth for jobs within production occupations than there are in computer occupations.
So Kim, so that kind of takes into account the dynamics of the labor market that has to do with how much turnover there are in jobs, how aging the current people might be, so they might be exiting to go into retirement. All of those factors are kind of put together in that total demand. Would that be a good way of thinking about it?
Yep, that is completely accurate. That is a great summation.
Okay, well, thanks. I find it interesting. It's because so many times when you look at total demand, it is counterintuitive about what you think sometimes. And so that's why those numbers are so important to look at in terms of what's out there. I think your example from looking at manufacturing is an excellent example. We have another question. This one's a little bit specific. So it's two questions. Are the SIPs on the PA SIP-SOC only secondary institution SIPs?
No, we use the full listing of SIP-SOC crosswalk of SIPs because we don't just deal with secondary schools. So what you will find there is the comprehensive listing. Over the years, we have gotten the subset from the Department of Education of what are considered, and I don't know if this is the appropriate word, but the approved or accepted codes that are used by career and technical education.
Yeah, and clearly, this is from my own experience, because I worked at a post-secondary institution and dealt a lot with SIPs and SOCs. Often the post-secondary SIP is a lot more specific, while the secondary one is more general. It might be, in terms of the narrowness of the definitions, because post-secondary narrows those areas even more in terms of what they deliver.
Absolutely.
Related.
And that's what we found with using the national crosswalk is they put a lot of effort and focus on the detailed level SIPs, but career and technical ed tends to use the broader ones because they teach a more diverse curriculum. So we want to make sure that for those broader SIP codes that they are reflective of what is being taught in Pennsylvania career and technical programs.
Yeah. I mean, an example would be an automotive technician is a kind of a general topic, a general one at the secondary level, and a post-secondary might have an automotive engineering technician or another kind of automotive specialty as their SIP code. And so that's where those links aren't necessarily one-on-one, but they're still in the same, they're there.
Correct.
Yeah. So the second question in this question is, are all Pennsylvania, in-demand occupation SOC codes listed in the PA SIP to SOC crosswalk?
The SIP to SOC crosswalk does include every SOC code that is currently being used. So it will have things that are not on the PA EIDL. It will have things that are not on an HPO list. It is a full comprehensive list. If the SOC code does not have or is not currently aligned with a training program, it is still included in the SIP SOC crosswalk. It is aligned to a 999999 code that we made up to make sure that every SOC code is accounted for. And I think we just labeled that like no formal training available or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact terminology.
So that kind of goes with another follow-up question right now that just came in. Per your statement of using the 9999 SIP earlier, is it preferable to move away from them if possible?
That is something that I think is more in how PDE provides their guidance. I'm coming at this from the perspective that we just want to make sure that for the SIP codes that are approved in Pennsylvania, we are capturing the correct occupational alignment. So I don't want to say that moving away from them is preferred, because oftentimes from what we've learned, the career and tech program is providing a more diverse curriculum. So they are appropriate codes, but we just want to make sure we're not missing any occupational connections in using them, because at the federal level, they tend to minimize which occupations they align them to. And we just want to make sure that for your interest and for data analytic purposes, that we're as comprehensive as possible.
So, so we got to follow up. So then the better move would be to work without WIB. Oh, yeah, without WIB to petition with our WIB. I think it's a typo. Would be to work with our WIB to petition to have appropriate SOC codes added to the high priority occupation list.
So if you are pursuing something added to the HPO list, it absolutely must go through the Workforce Development Board. We will not accept a petition that does not have Workforce Development Board sign off. However, the only thing that you would be petitioning through your local board to add would be is if you have a program where you are serving adults who are coming through the Pennsylvania Career Link in your area. So the only connection that you would have to make in terms of HPOs is if you do work with the local Career Link office and you have adult students who receive subsidized funding because they went through the Pennsylvania Career Link.
Okay. Okay. So Eric says, thank you. So it must answer his question sufficiently. I'm a little unclear, but that's not my issue. So, another question, is placement and retention data tracked at the state or at the workforce agency level?
We do everything in aggregate, so we are not looking at any one particular individual. I don't know if the local boards might be, or the local partners might be doing something that is tracking an individual specifically to see if person A is retained within a company. But we do not release any data that looks at that information here at the center.
Yeah, that whole issue of confidentiality is terribly important. If there's not a process to add occupations to the Pennsylvania in-demand occupation list, how do new technology programs get added? Is the state continuously revising it?
Yes, the PA EIDL is updated annually, and it is updated using data. So we would have to have the occupational codes reflect that new technology. Those codes are updated on a regular basis. I will tell you that while you may think it's a new code, in the coding structure, it does not always end up being a new code, because if it's simply a matter of using new technology to perform the same skills, it gets classified in the same occupational code. So for instance, with health records technicians, obviously they went from doing a lot of work by paper to doing a lot of work by computer or tablet. But ultimately they are still considered health records technicians. So it depends on whether or not it is actually creating a new occupation with a new set of skills, or if it is adding a skill set to an existing occupation.
So I
But
don't want
yes,
to put you, so I don't want to put you on the spot, Kim, but has there been one recently that has gotten new, has been
So,
added new that we haven't seen before?
so a new code, I mean, they are constantly breaking out codes, and then this one might be a little more dated, but a popular one I can think of is the breaking out of phlebotomists. There did not used to be a unique code for phlebotomists. I think maybe
Somebody
5
else
years
just
ago.
said maybe the electrical vehicle technology or technician, if you added a new one for that.
Possibly. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is, as we're talking with educators, there are changes to the SIP side of the house. So there may be a new SIP introduced, but it does not necessarily mean that a new SOC is introduced. So yes, we would capture any new SIP codes. Yes, we capture any new SOC codes. The federal partners aren't always so nice to have them happen at the same time, which is another reason we have our dynamic crosswalk, to make sure that all parties involved are able to catch up to the same coding structure.
So the key words there is the SIP is all about the instructional codes, and the SOC is all about the occupational codes.
Absolutely.
And keeping those in alignment. Because we throw that around so much, SIP and SOC, but that really is instructional compared to occupational.
Absolutely. And that's why, I mean, we were surprised when we started this process about 15 years ago, how much we did glean from the Department of Education, and how many changes we had to make sure that we were reflective of what was going on in Pennsylvania. And ever since then, we have tried very hard to make sure we keep that current. So I think we every year or so we hear something that causes us to change something.
I will say,
on
Kim,
that
I think that 15 years ago, I was at the table, and I
Probably.
remember that pain. I remember that pain and suffering. And what I heard today is so much more understanding and enlightened about what's going on the education side, what's going on with Perkins, what's going on with the workforce investment boards, and how they do and don't match. Sometimes they're for different purposes. And I think that really, I mean, I just am amazed by how much you folks have like pivoted to be able to work with both all these systems and to have things that will work with all of them. So I think that's amazing.